It's such a... I remember having this awful nightmare while we were on Tatooine.
Tatooine.
Bastel and I, as soon as we landed, talked about the vision we had both had. Apparently the star map was in some kind of cave. Makes sense as it was the only way an ancient thing like that would have survived all this time. Decided to break the mold a little and bring Juhani and Candaris with me on the mission.
Welcome to first the
Unfortunately, Zerka Corporation reared its ugly head as soon as we landed on the planet and insisted we pay for our landing place. Ugh. I don't know what was worse, the extortion or the fact that I was a nice guy and decided not to force persuade him to think we'd paid. But I was a nice guy and we left. No harm, no foul. We paid the 100 credits just to save time. If anybody decided to investigate, in my mind it meant it was worth it to keep them away from us. Give them no reason to suspect us of anything. If someone looked into the system and thought, hey, why didn't that guy pay for his landing? Well, that would cause problems that we wouldn't want to deal with right then. But thankfully we had time to look at Juhani's skills, and she was pretty good. She was in pretty good shape. She was certainly a headstrong young Jedi Guardian, I'll give her that. But after spending some time with her on the ship, she truly started to come into her own. And she learned a lot from her initial time on the ship. But just like that,
Sure.
we were ready to head out. I decided to give Juhani the second lightsaber we had found on Sheruk's body. She didn't recognize what Jedi it had come from, but she did feel like it must have been someone pretty young. Someone who hadn't been much older than her, and I feel like the message really hit home. That this is a dangerous galaxy. And her little temper tantrum with the dark side didn't mean much. But quickly, once we got off the ship, we encountered a merchant. He offered some very interesting crystals. But they were worth an insane amount of money. He wanted far more money than I could afford at the time. But someday I figured I'd be able to, you know, negotiate the price down or build up my credits enough. Because they all sounded extremely interesting. But we bought some bantha fodder from him on a hunch. And decided to head out, but a man stopped me about some kind of shipment on my ship. He mentioned something about Giza. I didn't want to think about it, and I figured I'd let Basil and Karth handle it while I was gone. Apparently a crate had broken, so I was sure I was going to find some kind of hell back on board once I left. Ran into a woman named Sharina Fizar quickly, whose husband had apparently been killed as a hunter out on the dunes.
What was that all?
This, for whatever it means.
The woman, apparently, her husband had been killed hunting wraiths out on the dunes. Or hunting something out on the dunes. And she had one nice plate of his left. And I offered to buy it from her. As soon as we stepped into the Zerka offices, though, I found a Duros, shouting at a woman. But before we talked to her, we talked to Juhani about how she had, what had made her become a Jedi, and she said some Jedi had come to her shitty planet. But we took this opportunity to also, before talking to the Zerka officer, talk to the Zerka employee about what he had for sale. He had some quite impressive weapons, even even a Mandalorian heavy pistol. One of the most powerful out-of-the-box pistols there was. But we just bought a small upgrade and went to talk to the officer about getting a hunting license. I decided to take a bounty from the woman in exchange for agreeing to hunt sand people and stop their attacks on convoys. She told me that she would give me a hunting license to let me leave Anchorhead if I agreed to hunt the sand people for her, which I did. Apparently they'd been attacking settlers, and that seemed like it was a not-so-good situation. But then as soon as I stepped outside, the Duros who had been harassing her yelled at me about finding another way and finding a droid who could communicate with the sand people. I decided I'd look into it, but not right that minute. I didn't even know where the droid shop was, much less have access to it. But apparently there was a swoop track. I decided to try racing on Tatooine. Swoop racing had been so much fun on Taris, I decided to give it another shot. The Hutt in charge told me about a man that he was trying to get to sign to be a big-time racer. But he was more than happy to let me race at the same time. I wasn't really concerned with how the system worked on Taris. And of course he didn't believe me that I'd won the Taris opener. I guess I shouldn't have been too surprised. You know, with the planet exploding and everything, it seems hard to believe. But after a very solid 22-second run of the run, I came back and found out that my time had been pretty darn solid. But so apparently there were 3 tiers of times to beat. And I beat the first time and got 10 racing bonds, which I could apparently sell for credits. Because, you know, the Hutt was too cheap to just give credits out for wins. But, since I already felt like I had a pretty good setup on the track, I just decided to race again and see if I could just take down the whole Tatooine circuit. Managed to shave even a few extra milliseconds off of my time. And just like that, I had beaten Tier 2. Unfortunately, I had to pay 100 whole credits each time I wanted to race, but I knew that the racing bonds would be worth more quickly, especially with how many racing bonds I was earning. I had already made it up to 40 bonds. And I knew that no matter how many I got from this tier, it would certainly have to be more if the Hutt wanted anyone to seriously think about racing. Unfortunately, I actually screwed up a little bit on my acceleration and actually lost a little time compared to what I had. But once I returned, I found that it had still been enough. But just like that, I had won all my races. What do you have on me? Apparently my best time ever was 21:95, and I figured maybe that wouldn't be a thing that people would beat for a while.
I like a man that can move fast when he needs to. Maybe I could trouble you for an auto print, or...
Oh, hi. Nice.
But I decided to talk to a Twi'lek named Nico, who apparently Moda had wanted to sign up.
Hard to Thanks.
Even though I had beaten everybody. It was funny talking to some of the lower level racers. But I told the hut that Nico had made a deal. And just like that, we had taken over the Swoop racing circuit on Tatooine, and we decided to head back out. Man, as soon as we left, for some reason this Twi'lek asked us for an auto print. And I thought, sure, why not? Didn't think much about it, but then things got a little darker about a second later. We passed the corner and immediately ran into a whole squad of Dark Jedi. But before anybody could even move, Candaris had dropped everybody, amazingly. His destabilizer certainly seemed to be doing a good job of destabilizing. But with that, we decided to head back to we decided to stop in at the Cantina and see if there was anything of value or anyone worth talking to.
Well, now, I saw you. Sure, not a. Best place to race is wherever you get hung. Now, I don't want it. A woman. I never won on Taris, but that doesn't matter.
Had a fun chat with a man named Gandorf, who is apparently a pretty good racer.
Well, fresh face.
But then a man challenged me to Pazaak, and he said a fresh face for the game. Furco Nellis.
Well, since you have never beaten me, to be fair, I'll use my...
He talked a massive game about some kind of practice deck. I wasn't interested in hearing any of his excuses. I decided to cut some of my higher +5s for some +-3s that I'd acquired. But I knew I had to beat this snot. He wanted to talk mad smack about how good he was at Pazaak, but I drew a natural 20. Sure, he had the -3 to tie it up, but I was ahead in cards now. He started slow rolling. I don't know why everybody in the galaxy was allowed to deal me first. But he held on 18, but unlucky for him, I had the -4 and took the set. He happened to have the +5 when he hit a 15, but I had the +4 to counter. And we were both tied at 2 cards with me up around. As always, the opponent managed to slow roll, and I decided to stand on an 18. He blew a whole card just to tie me for that round, and then it was up 2 cards and a round. Stood on another 18, knowing that his last card, even if it got him a win, was going to cost him big. But of course, he managed to slow roll into a natural 19. But for the next round, lucky enough, he took off almost as fast as I did. Decided to hit on a 17. I had the +-6 in my hand. But I decided to let him have a round. Probably shouldn't have hit, but I was feeling generous.
Would you like to
Foolishly stood on a 17. I knew I had to beat this guy again. I'd made some mistakes and played a little greedy, but I had to keep going. There was no way I was going to lose to this guy again. He decided to stand on an 18 after I'd already hit on an 18. Threw away a card for an early lead. Not always the best play, but I figured a win's a win, and it was better than busting out and giving it to him. In my mind, a card is usually worth the win. Found myself at 21, but with a -1, I hit 20. And he hit 21 also, but didn't have the -1. I was down 2 cards, but I was up 2 rounds. With a +4, he hit 20, and I knew I was in danger. I didn't think I'd hit the round, so I managed to get all the way up to 29, the highest number you can get. As is always my rotten luck, I was going first. I ended up on a 27, and I was in a bad spot. He was up a card on me and tied in rounds. All I could hope for was maybe finally some luck on my side, but hitting a 17 was not luck at all. And then the 26, no good. Had to keep trying, though. This guy needed to get beat, and the deck was just not being kind to me. Started off strong with throwing a ±5 down on a 20. But he smashed over the line with a 28. Turned away from the game for a second and hit on a 16, but then I perfectly drew the 8 so I could turn my +/-4 into a -4. But he had the +4 to counter. Still down a card, still tied in rounds. But my options were dwindling and I didn't like that. Decided to hit on a 15 because, as always, the game wasn't being kind and was slow rolling me, or slow rolling him. He threw a card down and I was at 1 card and him at 2, but I had the round on him if nothing else. +/-1 is definitely not the card I wanted to be holding, especially when he was throwing around such high numbers. But he threw a card away just to get a 19 and took the round, so we were tied in rounds and in cards. For once, he actually took off out of the gate a little faster than I did and ended up going over and busting on a 22. Game finally slowed down for me, but he had the perfect +5 to get to the 20. I knew I had to just keep going. And luck wasn't on my side. But I still had 1 card in my hand. But the game unfortunately dealt me a fast hand. He found himself at 19, and then I busted on 24. I refused to accept the game being this unkind to me. I'd been in this situation before, though, and you couldn't give up. Some games people tell you just keep pressing forward. And you just lose money, but I knew that Pazaak wasn't like that. Thankfully, I took an early lead off of him standing on a 19 after using a card, and then he busted. I was down a card, but I was up 2 rounds to 0. I might have finally had it in the bag. He hit a +5 onto a 20, but I dropped a +3 and also got a 20. And then it was still up to 2 rounds. I only had 1 card left, that ±1 that destroyed me last time. But I knew I had to keep trying. He had the +4 to get to 20, and then I busted. But now we're down to a card each, and I was up a round. If the game could just once slow roll me, I'd be fine, but nope. Busted again. But finally, he was off to the races faster than I was. I was actually where I needed to be. Had a 15, he hit 17, and then I busted at 23. I wasn't sure if this guy was playing a rigged deck or something, because it always gave him exactly what it needed. It also didn't help that every single time I've ever played Pazaak, I always ended up having to go first. I don't know if it was a special rule or something, or if everyone was just afraid of me. Thankfully, he busted and managed to go over, so I took a round with a card. Stood on a 19. I figured I'd let him have one, let him even up the playing field a little bit, but he didn't actually have a card. He just took the tie. I foolishly hit on a 17, but luck was with me. I hit the pure Pazaak 20 and took the round. I was up 2 rounds, just down 1 card. Found myself at 13 and just hit. Add a 22. Boom. -2. Down to 20. If I could get the easy sweep, I'd be so happy. He played a -5, got back down to 16, and then hit on 21.
I mean, I don't want to say that it was beginner's luck. You have some 200 credit. You won't be...
He finally said he was going to up the challenge to his 2nd tier deck. I was eager to see just what he meant. We both raced out to 13, and he hit a +/-1 up to 19, and I knew, bam, if I threw down the +3 and got to 20, I'd be ahead. Tied in cards up in rounds is always a good place to be. He held on an 18, and I decided that the round wasn't worth the card. Unfortunately, I came flying out of the gates with a 10, but I wasn't lucky enough for a pure Pazaak 20. Threw down a card, but damn his luck. He got the straight 20. Thankfully, though, he did come out of the gates with some high cards, but he had his +3 ready to get him up to 20. And all I could do was hope. I managed to have the +/-1, but now I was down a card and tied in rounds and already top decking a 10. Decided to stand on 18 and just hope for the best. He made it up to 19 with a +4, and now I was in the worst spot. I was tied in cards, but down in rounds. Had to use my +6 to get it, but then I was just on top decking luck. But then, pure Pazaak, the perfect 20. There was no way he could beat me, and then he also got the 20. I was crushed. I didn't want to have to play another round, but I had no choice. I had to just hope that the cards were on my side, and they weren't. I was losing credits at this time, but I had to beat this guy. I had to see what happened when I finally defeated his best deck. I knew it was possible. Traded card for card. But thankfully a 1 off the top kept me low. And then a 2, and then he was at 17 and he plussed up to 20. I decided I had to match him. We were both down to 2 cards and no one had even taken a round off the other. No one had even drawn first blood. Sadly, I hit up to 22 and I decided it wasn't worth it on the maybe -5 play. Finally, the deck gave him a higher card, but he had the +/-1, and he stopped at 20. Then we hit up to 26. Technically, we could have made it if we were allowed to play more than 1 card, but in Pazaak, it's 1 card or nothing. Luck just wasn't on our side, though. Except it was. We were down a set and tied in cards, but I felt maybe, just maybe, we could pull this out. Thankfully, he was getting the higher cards. I decided to risk it. And he busted on 24. I didn't have to play my +/-5. And then he started off high, and I pulled out the +/-5 for the 20. And that son of a bitch got the perfect 20. I was in top deck mode. I had to hope and pray. And then I got the perfect 10 off the 11. My luck was just so not with me. But I had to keep trying. I had to keep going. I was Mr. Pazaak. I had to prove that I was the best. Then with a massive bust, even though I was down a card, I had a round. Had to keep going. Had to keep pushing. And then a bust. Unfortunate luck meant that I was probably going to bust in the next round, but I had the +/-1. He had the -3, so he was still up a card and we were still tied on rounds. I wasn't where I wanted to be, but I had hope. If he could just draw some high cards and get out of the gate faster than me. And then he was at 21 and he held on 19. And I took the bust. I was down a round, but we were tied in cards. And then I came flying out of the gate with an 18, and I knew I had to stand, even if he won. He played one of his last 2 cards for the tie. And then he came out of the gate stronger with some high cards. And he held on a 19, that lucky son of a gun. I was on 18, but I had no cards to help. I had to hit. And then I played a card and stood on 19, and it was tied with 1 card apiece. I played my +/-6 to get my last chance at a 20. Hit up to 29. It was tied. He had 1 card left. And it was all down to this. And then I busted on 23. I was getting real sick of this guy's snarky attitude, though. Every time I lost, you sure you want to play again? You sure? You sure? I was not going to be defeated so easily. We both had the minuses we needed and started off with a 20. He had the +4 and got up to 19. I decided to risk taking the win, but luck wasn't with me as always this day. I lost the round when I could have tied it. But then I stood on a 19 because I knew it was worth possibly stripping a card from him, but then he busted. And suddenly my loss didn't seem so bad. Decided to stand on a 19. If I could get... But I wasn't lucky. He had the +2 on the 18 to take the exact win he needed. But then the deck slow rolled me, and he used his last card to get a 20. Thankfully, I had the ±4. He was up around, but I had the only card left in the game, and then he took off fast. He went up to 17. I won the round with a thank God 18. I had one card left, and we were tied. He stood on 18, and I had one shot. The +4, and I was victorious.
That's only fair, after all. You have one. Well, you have proven quite the opponent. I usually only use this deck at tournaments. Yes.
Alright, and with that, we were in his final tier deck. His quote-unquote tournament deck. 500 credits on the line. Lucky son of a gun drew 6 cards and didn't bust. But we were each down a card. But then some finally luck. He accelerated out of the gate faster than me and busted on the second round. Unfortunately, though, luck didn't stay. But I had the perfect chance to +6, and within 3 cards, I was there. And then he busted again. I was down a card, but up 2 rounds. I was so close to victory, I could almost taste it. I lunged ahead and used my +4 just to get a 19. But he had the -2 and took the set. Thankfully, though, he finally accelerated out of the gate. It was so close. And I was victorious.
However, you'll understand if we don't have any wagers. Stop by.
I net lost a little bit of money, but in the end, I had defeated him. And I had my pride. Asked the barkeep if he had anything of value, and he had some decent stuff. He had some shocking blasters and some Pazaak cards on him. I decided to buy his Pazaak cards. Couldn't hurt. But after that, Tatooine awaited us. But I think we'll tell the story of Tatooine next time, so thank you very much for listening, everyone. My name is Mr. Pazaak. Thank you for watching me play. And I'll continue my story later.